Introduction: the official summarized contract as citizens and lawmakers both. We are joining to demand the contract with Black America be addressed immediately to finally create the more perfect union all Americans deserve. As such, it is time for a complete paradigm shift in how we run our institutions and operate our country. The problems facing America are too deep and wide to simply reform one area or another. Long-lasting solutions demand a comprehensive, thorough rethink of America so that each new approach in each area supports the success of the others. This contract with Black America will provide conceptual approaches in several areas. Derek Hamilton, in the preface to the contract, says this contract with Black America strikes at the heart of racism and presents a blueprint to achieve racial economic justice. It was written in the backdrop of the killing of George Floyd, which set off a wave of protests not seen since the civil rights era of the 1950s and 60s, and a global pandemic in which the Black mortality rate is more than double the white rate and in which 45%, nearly half, of Black-owned businesses closed. That the impact of something presumably random, such as a pandemic, however catastrophic, can be so linked to one's racial identity is highly problematic and further evidence that, as a nation, we are failing miserably. This links to a larger political and economic vulnerability, whether we're in a pandemic or not. The immoral devaluation of Black lives has been ingrained in America's political economy and is long overdue for a reckoning. This contract with Black America is a patriotic pathway to promote our shared prosperity and achieve racial economic justice. Ambassador Andrew Young is equally supportive. The pandemic has revealed to us the importance of the essential worker, of which many are minorities. We can grow no stronger without improving the sustainability of those at the bottom of the economic pyramid. The contract for Black America is a comprehensive step toward an action plan that addresses the future stability of minorities and essential workers across the nation. To address racial inequality, after reading the contract with Black America, we the undersigned agreed to support and demand an open debate and a clear and fair vote within the first 100 days of the 117th Congress in 2021 on the following proposals to be codified into specific bills. Next, Representation 100-2021, Days of. First, join the fight for a better Black America. I, your first and last name, support this contract and demand an open debate and a clear and fair vote within the first 100 days of the 117th Congress in 2021 on the above proposals. Take action. Get updates on CWBA. Your email address. Share the summarized PDF. Share the message on social. Full contract. Get and stay informed. Dig deeper into the full 26-page contract and learn what this is all about. Your voice. What do you think? 218 comments. Most reacted comment. Hottest comment thread. Oldest Bambi Burnham 4 days. Preface by Derek Hamilton, Professor and Executive Director, Kirwan Institute at The Ohio State University, and incoming Henry Cohen Professor of Economics and Urban Policy and University Professor at the New School. This contract with Black America strikes at the heart of racism and presents a blueprint to achieve racial economic justice. It was written in the backdrop of the killing of George Floyd, which set off a wave of protests not seen since the civil rights era of the 1950s and 60s. And a global pandemic in which the Black mortality rate is more than double the white rate and in which 45%, nearly half, of Black-owned businesses closed. That the impact of something presumably random, such as a pandemic, however catastrophic, can be so linked to one's racial identity is highly problematic and further evidence that, as a nation, we are failing miserably. This links to a larger political and economic vulnerability, whether we're in a pandemic or not. The immoral devaluation of Black lives has been ingrained in America's political economy and is long overdue for a reckoning. Authentic agency is grounded in resources, and America's unjust racial wealth gap is rooted in a history that has privileged white people with financial advantages to buy crucial, additional and intergenerational advantages for themselves and their children. Government policy, and literal government giveaways, provided them with the finance, education, land and infrastructure to accumulate and pass down wealth from one generation to the next. In contrast, Black people were largely excluded and, when they were able to accumulate land and enterprise, it was subject to seizure by government, complicit theft, fraud and terror. This contract with Black America understands that this disparity is dramatic and that changes on the margin won't cut it. To reverse decades and generations of discrimination, we need a bold overhaul of our laws and economy. This contract rejects the racist and unsubstantiated rhetoric that ignorance, so-called grit, and personal responsibility are the sources of racial disparity. along with the accompanying neoliberal paternalism model in which government attempts to coerce or incentivize insinuated defective black people to behave accordingly and make better decisions. It is abundantly clear that the racial wealth gap has nothing to do with black behavior and everything to do with white privilege. So as a nation, are we finally ready to reverse our enduring and immoral blight of racism and authentically live up to the creed that all men and women are created equal? I do not know, but we have witnessed across all 50 states and pretty much the entire globe civil protesters shouting with solidarity that Black Lives Matter. Younger generations and social movements may be redefining economic good to embrace the principles of morality, humanity, and sustainability. This contract with Black America is a patriotic pathway to promote our shared prosperity and achieve racial economic justice. A contract with Black America, addressing racial inequality. After 400 years of unequal treatment, Black Americans have had enough with gradual reform in a nation that prides itself as the world's greatest democracy. While well-intentioned solutions may have been tried, it is simply too much to ask an oppressed people to stay patient, to finally create the more perfect union all Americans deserve. It is time for a complete paradigm shift in how we run our institutions and operate our country. While this contract with Black America may seem radical to some, the result will be a harmonious society that benefits everyone rather than the more radical alternative, which is watching the great American experiment come apart at the seams. The problems facing America are too deep and wide to simply reform one area or another. Long-lasting solutions demand a comprehensive, thorough rethink of America so that each new approach in each area supports the success of the others. This contract with Black America will provide conceptual approaches in several areas, including addressing Black opportunity and representation, bank lending and finance reform, judicial and public policy reform, expansion of 13th Amendment rights, police reform, reform in Hollywood, and an approach to our Confederate past. It will then present more in-depth proposals showing how these guiding principles can be put into action, first through a plan for neo-reconstruction followed by the America's Job Pact AJP, a plan that addresses jobs and education, Black opportunity and representation, the case for neo-reconstruction. Neo-reconstruction is an aggressive initiative meant to redress past wrongs systematically imposed on Black Americans economically throughout many generations. Wrongs that have had a severe negative impact on African Americans both economically and educationally. The specific case and plan for neo-reconstruction is presented later in the document. A commission will immediately be formed and empowered to quickly put the plan into action. Separately, a plan will also be devised to make Native Americans whole within the same timeline. Black Americans will be compensated for the value of work contributed by their ancestors, while Native Americans will get back the true value or land promised to them in various treaties. For Black Americans to be eligible, they must provide documentation proving their descent from at least one enslaved person. They must also prove they have identified as Black or African American for at least 10 years prior to the institution of the reparations program. Affirmative action for all secondary schools, colleges, and universities, public and private. Black enrollment must meet or exceed the percentage of the Black population nationwide, 13.4%. In addition, if the Black population in the county the school is located in is greater than 13.4%, the enrollment must be increased to that higher percentage. However, 25% Black enrollment will satisfy the county requirement if the school can prove they are a national school with less than 30% enrollment from the state in which the school is located. The same guidelines that apply to students will also apply to faculty. In the case of schools not deemed national, which are in county states where the Black population is less than 13.4%, i.e., Idaho, Montana, etc., the percentage required can be decreased down to a minimum of 5%. For clarity, enrollments of Black Americans greater than the minimum thresholds required is always permitted. Local funding for schools will be determined by an equal per student fund for all schools throughout the state. There is also extra funding for disabled and disadvantaged students. Change source of funding from property taxes to per student in line with the practice of most advanced nations. Otherwise, poor communities suffer from underfunding, perpetuating the cycle of poor education, mandatory civil rights and anti-racism classes in all elementary schools. Black scholars will write the textbooks and curriculum adopted for these classes. Institute the Black History 365 curriculum, African history highlighting the civilizations of Mali, Ghana, Songhai, Egypt, Ethiopia, Nubia, Zimbabwe, and others are incorporated into all schools' world history or social studies curriculums. Black representation on all government civil rights investigative bodies, reform gerrymandering. Districts cannot be designed to minimize the impact of the black vote. More polling sites in minority and black neighborhoods so that the number of polling stations provides equal access to black voters as they do in white and other communities. Lack of access violates the 1965 Voters' Rights Act, and the act should be amended to give it more teeth since it is currently not working. Juneteenth to become a federal holiday. Equal health care facilities in all neighborhoods regardless of demographics. A formal admission and apology to black Americans for past wrongs. Massive bank lending and finance reform. While capitalism is a good system, it requires capital to participate. For decades, black and Jewish people and neighborhoods, considered hazardous, were entirely, or largely, denied loans through the unscrupulous banking practice known as redlining. While redlining was made illegal in 1968 with passage of the Fair Housing Act, and then again with the 1977 Community Reinvestment Act (CRA), statistics show the perpetuation of de facto redlining in many of the same communities, most notably black communities, still exists. Studies consistently show blacks are denied access to lending in roughly the same percentages as before the Act's passage. The result is white families have nearly 10 times the net worth of black families today. As an example, even when black families get home mortgages, nearly 20% pay on average 1.5 percentage points above the average offered to whites. And although the black population is roughly 13.4% of the nation, approximately only 3% of loans and credit are given to black people, whether for credit cards, home mortgages, or black-owned businesses. In addition, only 1% of banks are black-owned or led. Bank lending on a yearly basis by percentage of dollar amount must match the black population in communities which the bank serves. However, the minimum threshold must yearly meet the percentage equal to the national black population, currently approximately 13.4%. As the black population increases, this minimum threshold will increase. Yearly audits and banks not meeting the minimum standards face loss of bank charters. To be crystal clear, every bank in the United States each year must lend in each category of loan, credit, mortgage, etc., a minimum of 13.4% to black-owned businesses or individuals across the category or instrument of financing involved. Rates on black loans federally and from banks to be same average rates as whites. For qualified black Americans, Federal Reserve to allow a one-time interest-free loan for home ownership. Federal Reserve currently provides corporations with free or 1% loans and is flooding market with liquidity. Instead of it all going to prop up the stock market, help create black family wealth through property ownership, Federal Reserve to adopt a view employing modern monetary theory with the goal of maximizing employment, housing, and educational opportunities, as well as improving quality of living for black and poor Americans. Spending will be constrained only when actual inflation appears. Federal plan of baby bonds proposed by Derek Hamilton will provide every child born into lower wealth families with accounts that will start with $1,000 and would continue to funded by the government based on family wealth up to $46,500 as proposed by Senator Booker and Representative Presley. Accounts to be managed by the Treasury and use of funds restricted to asset-enhancing actions such as buying homes, starting businesses, and funding education. Change the decades-old credit scoring model to mandate consideration of consumer data on rent, utility, and cell phone bill payments. A cookie jar company is any company that was knowingly involved in human trafficking, human bondage, slave trading, or slave labor at any point in its existence. Companies found to have directly benefited by the private prison system and those who perpetuated overtly racist policies will also be considered cookie jar companies. Individual negotiations will be conducted by a commission formed for the singular purpose of assessing penalties and remedies from these companies caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Venture capital and private equity funds that take money from police unions or other public entities must invest 13.4% of their total funds in black-owned businesses. According to Axios, only 1% of VC-backed founders were black between 2013 to 2018. Government pension funds. Federal and state pension funds control over $1 trillion. They must allocate 13.4% of their investments into black-owned enterprises and businesses. Corporations are publicly regulated, and as part of the certification process, all past and current tax returns must be made public. Create a transparent reporting mechanism for abuses to economic programs designed to benefit communities in need, including federal programs such as Economic Opportunity Zones and Community Reinvestment Act (CRA). Audit of opportunity zones to determine who is benefiting from disbursement of such funds, and tax breaks, and public disclosure of the owners of projects granted such access. Judicial and public policy reform. Recognize racism as a public health crisis. It mandates a federal response, ban all privately run prisons. Fines established to be paid by companies that profited off the private prison system. Prisoner labor not allowed without consent. Prisoners to be compensated at the minimum wage and hazardous pay provided for applicable duties. Declare the Ku Klux Klan a terrorist organization. Lynching to become a federal hate crime with a recommended federal sentence of life. Free all prisoners for marijuana possession. Eliminate laws establishing mandatory minimums. Eliminate 3 strikes laws. First offense for illegal drug use or possession to require government payment. For entry into an approved drug rehabilitation program rather than imprisonment. Once a prisoner completes sentence, voting rights are restored. Personal data. Most states publicly release bulk data about arrestees unchecked, like the 1970 Fair Credit Reporting Act regarding credit data. There must be guidelines that allow similar privacy and accuracy protections and the right to dispute and correct inaccurate data. The Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice reformed through stricter guidelines. So DOJ oversight of police departments and other government institutions becomes more than a rubber stamp. DOJ can be sued for non-compliance so that standards do not vary depending on administration. Currently, the black population is overrepresented in the military as 17% of soldiers are black. The percentage of black enlisted soldiers is even higher. To compensate for this disproportionate contribution to our national defense, 5% of the Defense Department budget will be allocated towards beautification, education, and youth programs in predominantly black neighborhoods. Such programs will build goodwill towards the country, resulting in greater patriotism, more successful recruitment efforts, and a generally more enthusiastic military population. EPA to inspect water supplies in all communities nationwide for lead and other forms of contaminants. Fixing polluted water systems to deliver clean water will take priority in any future infrastructure spending bill. Technology action plan that provides for computers and broadband in poor communities. Work with technology companies to set up high-security 24-hour computer lab learning centers in the heart of technology deserts. Constitutional amendment codifying expansion of the 13th Amendment by the courts. Amendment will abolish slavery in any form, including as a punishment for crime as allowed by the 13th Amendment for prison inmates. Further, it will declare unconstitutional any government-run system including justice, policing, education, health, and welfare, etc. that does not provide services on an equal basis to all citizens and communities. If provided public services fail to meet minimum standards, they will be considered on their face unconstitutional unless proven special circumstances. Reverses burden of proof to those in non-compliance instead of civil rights lawyers having to prove systems are racist. While courts have expanded the interpretation of the 13th Amendment to provide some of these rights, this amendment will eliminate any uncertainty. Police reform. Qualified immunity will be eliminated. Legislation to reverse Supreme Court case Plumhoff v. Record 572 U.S. 765, 2014, in which the immunity was upheld. Before legislation is passed, the Democratic Party should oppose qualified immunity when the official party platform is drafted in August. This will pressure mayors to instruct city attorneys not to assert qualified immunity as an affirmative defense. Police lawyers can still argue why they should not be. Mandatory malpractice insurance to be carried by police officers like lawyers and doctors do. This protects victims' ability to collect on bona fide claims. Insurance to be paid for by police departments. As a result, an officer who creates too many legal actions will be dropped because of financial pressure by rising insurance rates rather than requiring another officer to cross the blue line. Insurance companies will also demand de-escalation training to lower rates. Municipalities liable for officers' unconstitutional actions. Overturn with legislation Mon LV Department of Social Services Supreme Court Case 436 U.S. 658, 1978, that protected municipalities from unconstitutional actions by police. This will add skin in the game for cities which have the most direct power to reform policing. Federal laws regarding police misconduct to change standard from willfulness to recklessness. While recklessness still poses a high bar to identify and prosecute police misconduct, it will make it more possible. Police unions can be held liable and sued for shielding bad cops, suppressing evidence and testimony to that effect, and for knowing and reckless disregard of material evidence that an officer is unfit mentally for the job. Mandatory dashboard and body cams. In the event they are turned off and the incident results in a serious injury or death to any suspect or witness, it will be considered a felony punishable by prison unless proof of malfunction. If there is a claim of excessive force or abuse and the cams are off, The first incident will result in a warning, the second will be a suspension, and third will require firing, cam footage, body, and dashboard. To be released within a week for incidents resulting in death, serious injury, or that give rise to charges of excessive force, elimination of no-knock warrants. They are unnecessary as police can secure the scene. Mandatory name tags and affiliation requirements. Applies to all police and law enforcement authorities at the local, state, and federal level with non-compliance resulting in disciplinary action. Undercover assignments not requiring compliance must be approved by a court. Chokeholds illegal nationwide. This will apply to any maneuver resembling a chokehold or designed to cut off airways to affect breathing. Whistleblower protection expanded within the active police force or for those enrolled in a police academy. Discouraging officers under 5 years on the job to report bad behavior will be grounds for dismissal. It will be a criminal offense to reveal the identity of a whistleblower. Tampering with evidence results in automatic dismissal from force. Crime to intentionally withhold exculpatory evidence by police or prosecutors. Newly discovered DNA evidence must be immediately considered to reverse wrongful convictions. Not to do so is a crime and applies to police, judges, and prosecutors. Failure to act will come under the Office of Independent Prosecutors discussed below. Federal database open to public scrutiny containing all complaints both internal from the public or related to disciplinary actions. Automatic federal DOJ review of any police officer exceeding a predetermined amount of complaints, once fired for cause, cannot be rehired. A police officer fired for use of excessive force, violent or inappropriate actions directed at a citizen, non-use of body cams or for any felony are not allowed to be hired in any other. Creation of Office of Independent Prosecutors. These prosecutors will solely focus on prosecuting police accused of wrongdoing. This will eliminate the conflict of interest of DAs who must charge police, although they have an inherent and unwaivable conflict as they require police testimony to charge other criminals. Attorney generals and district attorneys can no longer accept contributions or endorsements from law enforcement bodies, especially police unions. Loss of pensions if convicted of a felony or greater while on the job. Budget reallocation. In what has been referred to as defunding the police, 20% of 2020 budgets, then going forward adjusted to inflation. To be dedicated to improving conditions in lower class and black neighborhoods, 20% of all police department budget increases will also flow to the community organizations tasked with spending such funds. Residency requirements. 90% of police must live within 25 miles of the jurisdictions they work in. 65% must live within the jurisdiction itself. Police forces should demographically reflect the communities they serve. In the case of partners, at least one lives within the jurisdiction, mandating a certain number of police department paid hours of community service for all street police in the communities they police. Community policing. Non-armed personnel set up to handle most cases. These include taking reports for crimes already committed, non-active situations, filing of complaints, non-violent crimes or disputes between neighbors, etc. Remove permanent placement of police officers from all grade, middle, and high schools. Domestic abuse. Create domestic abuse services, analogous to child protective services. Personnel trained to deal with domestic abuse will be sent on such calls. Like CPS cases, a domestic abuse service member can ask for police backup if they feel the situation is dangerous and warranted. De-escalation police training. Require training in de-escalation techniques similar to Daytona police training based on Scotland police procedures, and showing cases of police abuse and what is non-acceptable during training. Currently, most academies only show footage of cop killings and train police in aggressive techniques. A popular saying among police is, "I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 inches. Continuation of training. Training to be updated every 3 years in use of excessive force and dealing with mentally or disabled ill people. Such training will also include racial sensitivity training and update police on new laws locally and federally. Any police officer who discharges his weapon 5 or more times on the job must go back to police academy for retraining and take mandatory course on anger management. This threshold of weapon use can be increased or decreased depending upon jurisdictional averages. The intention is to identify and retrain outliers, as most police officers rarely utilize their guns more than once, if at all. Civil rights history will be taught the first month in the police academy or other training. These classes should include the history of black codes and Jim Crow laws. Reason for contact. Upon initial contact of any kind with a citizen, officers must state reason for contact when an individual is first approached. No duty to speak. Police not allowed to escalate a situation merely because a person refuses to talk to police or answer questions without an attorney. Misstating the law by police to suspects not allowed to elicit testimony. Knowingly threatening people with greater charges than the situation dictates gives rise to disciplinary action. When defining knowingly, the standard applied will be what a reasonable police officer should have known: reduce contact during traffic ticketing. Officer must immediately tell the driver why she was pulled over. Cannot search a vehicle without an independent warrant. No need for those cited to sign tickets. Efforts made to reduce time and contact between officer and driver, which benefits both, i.e., digitally limiting contact as technology allows. Tickets issued and sent by mail where possible. If the officer believes the driver is driving recklessly or suspicion of a DUI, they may pull over the car, but pullovers can be challenged by dash cam footage. If the footage does not show cause for concern, the officer can be disciplined. Stealing. Police officers caught stealing from a person's house or vehicle will be charged with double the penalty a non-officer would be charged with for the same crime. Military-grade weapons will not be brandished in public unless gunfire or deadly force required. Eliminate civil and criminal asset forfeiture, as it gives police departments economic incentive to charge crimes which conflicts with the goals of serving justice. Only exception is if the assets are related to the crime. It will be illegal for a police officer to have sex with a detainee or suspect under their charge. It will be considered statutory rape because it is unreasonable to assume consensual sex due to the power dynamic. Shoot-to-wound policy in event of an armed suspect, fleeing suspect, that poses an imminent danger only, or if deadly force is unnecessary, and all quota-based policing. Entertainment industry reform and reparations. Mandatory funding of black studios by the largest Hollywood studios, record companies, and television studios and networks to compensate for years of lack of support, stereotyping, and damage to black culture. Each will be required to fund an amount yearly. Black studios will own and produce content by black creators and will be run primarily by black leadership. Content can be licensed to major studios. For a race to thrive, it must be able to create art that reflects its own views of the world. Racism still runs rampant through our society, and Hollywood is providing the instruction manual. Licensing of public airwaves to broadcast networks such as NBC, Fox, CBS, and ABC must require black-produced content equal to 20% of the total content on the network as measured by time. Time slots must be of similar quality to other content. The same applies with radio stations and any other media given access to publicly licensed airwaves by the FCC. Minimum 13.4% black cast and crew on all major television and film productions. The crew requirement cannot be waived, but casts that are overwhelmingly white, black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian, etc., can be waived as reasonable for TV shows and films to be more reflective of reality. Monuments and institutions. Eliminate all Confederate statues. Rather than destroy them, they are to be kept by the National Archives, Smithsonian Institute, and/or analogous state facilities. They are to be used only in displays and exhibits designed to investigate a racist past. This is not sanitizing our past, as history exists in books and online. There is no need to display monuments of these types, just as we allowed the Saddam Hussein statue to be removed, as well as the Berlin Wall, where doors easily could have been inserted. All uses and displays of Confederate flags on government grounds or on property with public access is illegal. Rename all streets, schools, public structures, towns, scholarships, etc., named after Confederate soldiers or leaders. Rename with names of black heroes or white abolitionists. Memorial built in Washington, D.C. to victims of police excessive force resulting in death or permanent disability. Analogous to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in that all names and ages are included. Black Americans' responsibility. Chronic poverty creates an atmosphere full of negativity, frustration, hopelessness, depression, alcoholism, drug abuse, crime, and violence. These are some of conditions that plague the black community, which is dealing with extreme generational poverty. As we begin to gain social and economic equality, it is our duty to clean up ourselves and our community. This contract is a two-way street. As we gain social and economic equality, we must begin to dissolve any bitterness in our hearts for past wrongs. We must become better citizens who are more productive on all levels of American society. We really must step up after we pass the contract with Black America with no more excuse left in the kitty. Our entertainers should be persuaded to deliver more positive content that leads our youth to make better choices in life. A new pride must develop with these new opportunities, and we must fight against negativity, frustration, hopelessness, depression, alcoholism, drug abuse, crime, and violence. Falsifying documentation to establish descent from an enslaved person punishable as a crime. Black businesses who receive loans per lending reforms with over 100 employees will employ at least 50% non-black employees, for all Americans. Completion of rehabilitation programs for at least 28 days for first offenses for illegal drug use of possession. Failure to complete results in imprisonment. As part of the 20% of diverted police budgets, community groups will be organized to work with troubled youth and will have a specific mandate to also decrease black-on-black violent crime, other crime, and address gang violence. Community groups will make themselves available in their neighborhoods to provide mentoring and community-based leadership. All Americans guilty of a crime and apprehended agree not to unreasonably resist arrest putting others in danger. When enrolled in the AJP and other programs designed to assist in education and employment, to meet the requirements expected of all enrollees and to work diligently to succeed. The case for Neo-Reconstruction. We are proposing a black agenda, a Neo-Reconstruction, that would empower African Americans economically and educationally, as well as provide justice and equal protection under the law. The marketing of Neo-Reconstruction. At the end of slavery, the Republican Party took the lead on attempting to fairly and justly integrate African Americans into American life. This was done through a government-led effort called Reconstruction, a period that lasted roughly from the passing of the Reconstruction Act of 1867 to the Compromise of 1877. During the decade of Reconstruction, African Americans were enfranchised, legally given voting and civil rights. Nearly 2,000 African Americans were elected to public office, and the black representation in the South Carolina state legislature was a robust 59%. In 1876, Republican presidential candidate Rutherford B. Hayes reached a compromise with the Democratic Party that ceded control of the South to the Democrats, ending Reconstruction and eventually leading to the institution of a Jim Crow era that placed African Americans in a form of de facto slavery for approximately the next 100 years. Had Reconstruction continued, the African American condition and race relations in America would be far beyond what they are today. Recognizing this unfortunate lost opportunity, we propose Neo-Reconstruction, an aggressive initiative that has the purpose of redressing past wrongs and revitalizing the black community economically, educationally, judicially, and in every other way necessary to assure that African Americans have full and equal opportunity and status within our country. Neo-Reconstruction. Key areas to address. Economics. 10%. Economics of policy. According to the real estate app Redfin, African American families have lost out on at least $212,000 in personal wealth over the last 40 years because their home was redlined. The results of these policies leave African American families with 10% of the net wealth of white families. Economic impact. Through the institution and racist enforcement of laws and policies such as the Homestead Act of 1862, the Social Security Act of 1935, the GI Bill of 1944, and the Federal Housing Administration loans, and its related redlining, of the 1930s-1960s, white Americans were granted advantages and opportunities that African Americans were not. All but 2% of the $120 BLN of government-backed mortgage loans that were awarded were given to whites. This reality undeniably helped create the incredible wealth gap between blacks and whites today. According to the Federal Reserve, the median white household, $171,000, has nearly 10 times more wealth than the median black household, $17.60 K. A white person without a high school diploma has nearly as much wealth as a household led by a black person with a bachelor's or advanced degree. A household led by a white person with a high school diploma has more wealth than a household led by a black person with a bachelor's or advanced degree. Lingering costs of race-based policy. According to the real estate app Redfin, African American families have lost out on at least $212,000 in personal wealth over the last 40 years because their home was redlined. Because of these historic wrongs, masses of African Americans need economic revitalization and relief, including though not limited to more home ownership, less debt, better credit, and higher incomes. $171,000, $20.70 K, $17.60 K, white, Hispanic, black, median household wealth. Economics. Any man or woman who wrongs another in any way and so is unfaithful to the Lord is guilty and must confess the sin they have committed. They must make full restitution for the wrong they have done, add a fifth of the value to it and give it all to the person they have wronged. Numbers 5, 6 NIV, who should receive restitution. Our goal is to propose economic strategies and processes to address the concerns of the 40 million living descendants of American slavery. As a group, they range between 3-5 generations away from this legalized economic atrocity and are current victims of post-civil rights discrimination such as racial policing and increased costs of court and legal fees, credit discrimination and higher costs of interest, housing markets discrimination and depressed home values, job discrimination and persistent wage gaps, mass incarceration and loss of wages, subprime mortgage collapse and race-based exploitation, student debt disparities that are impacted by race. What are the economic targets? To use a measurable and fair calculation similar to those suggested above. To address the economic implications of the above infractions and to lead the country to a better and more inclusive economic infrastructure. Neo-Reconstruction, calculation metrics, compensation for lost wages. Economist Larry Neal calculated the differences between average wage paid to non-black laborers and the expenditures for expenses paid for slaves, such as clothing and housing. This calculated to $1.40 TRLN in 1983, now estimated between $5.-8 TRLN with 5% assumed interest. Compensation for market value of slavery. Confederate Senator Judah Benjamin estimated the market value of slaves to be $4 BLN in 1860. Compounded to 2019, that would equate to $9.30 TRLN with 5% assumed interest. Freedmen's Bank and the Seneca Stone Ring scandal. Payment to the descendants of the depositors of the Freedmen's Bank due to the fact that the bank leader and noted Republican politician, Henry Cook, used the former slaves' funds during a financial collapse, and the federal government didn't insure or support it. The net present value, NPV to account for interest, of the capital was approximated at $65 million in 2018 dollars. Job market discrimination calculation. Between 1929 to 1969, if you just account for 40% of pay gap due to race. Base labor market discrimination. Gains accrued to whites were about $1.60 TRLN. Considerations for disbursement. Recognizing that the GDP of the overall U.S. economy is $20.50 TRLN, we are not suggesting the above amounts be disbursed as a one-time lump sum payment which could adversely affect the American economy and Treasury functions, not to mention cause staggering inflation. Instead, the above calculated amounts could be distributed in several forms, including annual cash installments over a 10-year period, tax breaks, tax credits, interest-free loans to spur home ownership, and/or funding the additional proposals made below. Recommended tactics for restitution. Mandate that descendants of African American veterans of World War II who were unable to capitalize on the opportunities afforded by the GI Bill of 1944 to 1956 should receive the NPV of those benefits today calculated at a 5% interest rate. Start trust fund for asset building, grants for home ownership, education, business startup funds, or vouchers for purchase of financial assets, along with a governing body to establish rules and protections for proper allocation of capital for long-term development. Mandate that all American corporations that benefited financially from slavery start management trainee programs for African American college graduates, with the goal being to increase the number of blacks in management executive positions to one of equality with the black population, 13%, within a given number of years, and donate a federally mandated percentage of their profits to black-owned businesses over a predetermined period of time. Launch a user-friendly national website and app for support in rolling out this plan, along with networking, training and educational components. Create a pension system for purposes of investment and growth where only interest payments are currently accessible. A variation of this was earlier suggested by Callie House and the 1898 Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association. Make a significant capital investment in financial infrastructure, as currently 70% of African American communities don't even have a branch or bank of any type and are subject to predatory lending. Develop a commission and a timeline in which commission will address particular economic infractions over time to bring closure on a case-by-case basis. Create and support endowments for HBCUs, which still educate the majority of black doctors and engineers. Create a transparent reporting mechanism for abuses to the restitution program to ensure systems remain efficient and effective, including federal programs such as Economic Opportunity Zones and Community Reinvestment Act (CRA). Mandate private equity, pension funds, mutual funds, and venture capital firms to divest from privatized prisons and to be accountable for increasing black venture capital allocation from the current 1% to one closer to equality with the black population, 13%, within a given number of years. Mandate corporations to increase the number of blacks in management executive positions to one closer to equality with the black population, 13%, within a given number of years. Mandate corporations through tax incentives or law to spend a percentage of their profits with black-owned businesses over a predetermined period of time. For example, if the tech and banking sector were to spend just 2% of their net profits for the next 10 years, that would equate to $25 BLN and $19.40 BLN respectively. Forbes. The 2% solution inside billionaire Robert Smith's bold plan. June 19, 2020. Implementation timeline, committee formation, data gathering. Begin phase 1 of payments, 2020, 2021, 2022. Neo-reconstruction, key areas to address, education, race-based spending. Due to the spending differentials, African American students receive a lower value education even in 2020. Educational spending was the key metric used to argue the pivotal Brown versus Board of Education case. Education spending. Many of our hearts are being called to a new level of commitment in the fight against racial injustice. As a nation and as individuals, it's not always easy to know how to invest in the change we long to see. One of the most impactful ways to make a difference is to address the inequities in education. For example, predominantly white public school districts, K-12, receive $23 billion more funding than school districts that are predominantly non-white, AC according to EdBuild. Even when adjusted for income levels, white students receive roughly $1,500 more per year than non-white students. Black students face more challenges in the U.S. public education system and higher education. Innovative policy change, financing, and equal access to quality learning and leadership development opportunities are necessary to increase the level of racial equity in our country and achieve greatness. Predominantly white districts. Predominantly minority districts. Total average per pupil. Data from 2019 study by EdBuild.org. $13, $908, $11,682, $13,118. Education metrics. Increased educational opportunities and empowered institutions are musts if African Americans are to approach anything resembling racial equality. Historically, black colleges and universities fit both the educational and institutional criteria, so strengthening these schools should be foremost in any neo-reconstruction plan. HBCUs, however, are woefully underfunded, and any sincere attempt to improve Black America's post-secondary educational opportunities must include bolstering their financial outlooks. For instance, the total endowment of all 102 HBCUs combined is $2.1 billion. That's slightly more than 5% of the approximately $40 billion endowment of Harvard University alone. In fact, 54 predominantly white institutions, PWIs, many if not most of which profited greatly from slavery, have endowments of $2 billion or more. Considering their drab financial plight, HBCUs have done an admirable job of educating African American students. While making up only 3% of the nation's schools and educating 10% of black college students, they have produced nearly 20% of black college graduates, including 50% of black doctors. Like black institutions, black students often find themselves in financial peril, as 65% of African American college students are independent, meaning they must balance pursuing a degree with full-time work and family responsibilities. According to the United Negro College Fund, this challenging juggling act is a major factor in the low retention rate of African American students, only 45.9% of whom graduate within 6 years, the lowest rate among any demographic in the country. Another factor? The sad reality that just 57% of black students have access to all of the math and science courses necessary to prepare them for college, compared to 81% of Asian Americans and 71% of white students. No matter how you slice it, from kindergarten to college, African Americans, often already battling economic hardships, fight an uphill battle when it comes to getting the quality education needed to compete in the American mainstream. Prospective education proposals achieve equal per student public school funding based on state general tax revenues rather than local property tax revenues. Americans are committed to the welfare of children and the ideal of equal opportunity, creating a level playing field for all students, but many are unaware that inequities exist in public school funding across our country. Funding differences from state to state and intrastate vary widely because much of the financial support for public schools comes from local property taxes, which means the amount of funding that communities are able to provide for their schools varies according to community affluence, although most people in the United States are not aware of it. Other advanced nations do not fund public schools with local property taxes. Instead, They provide equal per student funding from general tax revenues for all schools throughout the country. Some nations also provide extra funding for disadvantaged students. Adequate and equitable resources are important to the future success and development of Black students. Far too often, Black students, males in particular, are unnecessarily placed in special education classes, while the number of Black students who take honors and advanced courses remains significantly below that of other groups. Neo-Reconstruction. Create freedom grants to provide African American students the freedom to pursue undergraduate and/or graduate education for zero out-of-pocket tuition. Findings suggest that racial diversity matters for learning. The core purpose of a university. Increasing diversity is not only a way to let the historically disadvantaged into college, but also to promote sharper thinking for everyone. American colleges and universities contribute at least 1% of their total endowment market value, $610 billion, to fund this. Leverage Guaranteed said. Aside from the national lotteries specifically designated for HBCUs and predominantly Black colleges and universities, scholarship programs for African American students, and a special 529 college savings seed and/or matching funds planned for U.S. African American families, lotteries were used not only as a form of entertainment but as a source of revenue to help fund the colonies. Each of the 13 original colonies established a lottery system to raise revenue. 2 major lottery games, Mega Millions and Powerball, are both offered in nearly all jurisdictions that operate lotteries and serve as de facto national lotteries, mandate using the set aside proceeds for Black communities' educational empowerment initiatives programs as opposed to the current system where most state legislatures use the lottery money to pay for a portion of the state public education budgets and spend the money that would have been used had there been no lottery cash on other things. All colleges and universities with an endowment above $1 billion that benefited from slavery must give a government-mandated percentage of their endowment to HBCUs. Institute SPURS, Summer Program for Underrepresented Students, initiative at major colleges and universities primarily in the STEM disciplines for underrepresented students from predominantly minority communities. Often during summer periods, disadvantaged students fall behind their wealthier peers. Many first-generation college students come from socially or economically disadvantaged backgrounds. In order for these students to succeed and for society to benefit, it is crucial that we provide the means for these students to gain access to the same careers as their white counterparts. This program will play a pivotal role in advancing education for underrepresented and economically disadvantaged African American students. Additionally, SPURS will create diversity of representation among the future ranks of doctors, investigative scientists, technologists, and design experts, funded by the Federal Department of Education as renewable grants. Institute the Black History 365 curriculum. According to studies, there is a direct correlation between students' self-awareness and exposure to positive imagery of like groups and their academic achievement. We should adopt this existing program into our school curriculum on a national level. Addendum number 1. Focus on the Black family. Any agenda that sincerely seeks to promote the best interests of the African American community must strive to restore the Black family unit of man, woman and children. Whether in the nuclear family or the extended family version that has also been prominent throughout history, the father-mother-child paradigm has always been the hub of any strong people, society and civilization. Indeed, that is why those opposed to African American advancement have long focused on destroying the Black family, largely through the disempowerment of the Black male. To highlight and grumble about fatherlessness while handicapping Black males with presumed criminalization, inferior educational and career opportunities, and mass incarceration is at best counterproductive and at worst hypocritical and duplicitous. As policies are implemented to improve the economic, educational and judicial realities of African Americans, the intentional restoration of Black boys and men is imperative. A Brookings Institute article published in 2017 stated, "One thing is clear. Educational and economic outcomes for Black men have profound implications for the prosperity of Black families and the prospects of Black children. And for racial equity more broadly. Watchdog, this user-friendly interface will provide the socially conscious consumer free access to company and business ratings that are data-driven, transparent, and accurate. We will provide a heat map that displays ratings for mid and large cap companies at a glance based on reported data highlighting hiring practices, board representation, Black business spending, and other relevant diversity and inclusion metrics." Jobs and Education, America's Job Pact, AJP, An example of what can be accomplished under the contract with Black America: it is possible to have a jobs and education plan that serves the needs of all poor people, government, and corporate America. As the infrastructure of our inner cities crumbles, so too does hope in the hearts and minds of the chronically poor who feel permanently disenfranchised from their own place of birth. The American dream and promises of the free market system simply are not working, where cycles of poverty and often racism have left large swaths of otherwise potentially productive citizens behind. Dating from the time of the Great Migration, former slaves moved out of the South and populated many of our industrial cities: Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, D.C., Baltimore. Since that time, minorities have been systematically excluded from building the security of long-term equity in their communities and suffered the pressures of economic discrimination, entrenched first through the redlining practices of the early 20th century and now through the gentrification pressures of globalized capital flows, which continue a legacy of systemic discrimination. Their education systems do not exhibit a clear path from educational success to meaningful employment. While a myriad of existing programs attempt solutions, they are not working, and people are often unaware of how to take advantage of them. When people have no hope, they have nothing to lose. This can and has led to tragic results, including increases in crime, an exploding jail population, and escalated gun violence. Disenfranchised people are angry as they see others jetting ahead, even as their own communities' human resources remain untapped. At the same time, numerous U.S. companies cannot find enough skilled employees to meet their needs, dampening U.S. productivity and resulting in anemic growth. Companies would be willing to invest in people if their needs could be fulfilled. And all of this is unraveling against the backdrop of an America that is in desperate need of new infrastructure. We must acknowledge that there is a mismatch between the company's needs and the skills available in the inner city. This continues the vicious cycle of gentrification and disenfranchisement. Underinvested neighborhoods in the inner city become settlement areas for an influx of workers trained to address the skills gap. And those already living in those communities are unable to get those jobs and earn the wages needed to remain in their homes. And so, even as growth occurs in the very communities which need it the most, the people that need it the most are not receiving the benefits afforded by growth. AJP will help American companies avail themselves of vast resources of untapped potential in people. AJP will give people willing to work hard to get access to education, trades, and skills that will lead directly to real jobs. Through a groundbreaking public-private partnership, companies will gain access to a workforce that can fulfill its needs while at the same time allowing people to gain the skills required for such jobs. Different people have different skill potentials and desire different job opportunities. AJP addresses diversity of potentialities and maximizes the benefits to both the communities and the individuals motivated to enter the program and do the work required. The results are dramatic benefits to the country at large. The America's Job Pact, AJP, along with the contract with Black America, is an example of how systematic change and rethinking of American institutions can help everyone benefit. The AJP is a vision for a national-scale program to provide solutions to problems with jobs and education through the creation of cream-of-the-crop training centers, CCTC. AJP will, help American companies, including those in technology and infrastructure, avail themselves of vast resources of untapped potential in the inner-city human capital, teach students a new trade or help them to acquire marketable skills along with life, communication, and organizational skills for other job opportunities outside the AJP family, force students to learn discipline of attendance or risk losing participation in the program, create pathways to employment for those people willing to work hard, and link these pathways through access to education, trade, schools, and affordable skills, building that will lead directly to real jobs, since companies will help sponsor these programs as they have on a more localized level, participants will get first shot at open jobs, and they will have a duty if offered jobs from participating companies at competitive rates to work a certain number of years in exchange for the education and stipends they received. Both parties benefit. Companies will gain access to a workforce that can fulfill its needs while at the same time allowing people to gain the skills required for such jobs. In each city, we will recruit the cream of the crop from troubled neighborhoods and cities through a variety of entry points, including the mayor's office and those of local elected officials, local economic development entities, and civic action groups. Local leaders can be enlisted to recruit people who will be admitted to the program based on performance in schools or testing to determine suitability for the program. Invitations to attend the area CCTC would be given to students and adults who show exceptional discipline, focus, passion, and talent. CCTC education and training centers would be located in or near at-risk neighborhoods for graduates from middle and high schools, community colleges, universities, and even non-graduate adults to attend and get top-level education and training and get preferred access for a job that will work for both the students and these companies or agencies. Cost sharing can be attained by looking at beneficiaries in society, and equally borne by both the country at large as well as the nation's corporations, both of whom would benefit immensely from successful implementation. Companies will lower their cost of acquiring and training employees while reducing turnover, one of the largest costs faced in expansion, and if necessary, any financing gap could be closed via government assistance with the start-up and management of the program. As seen in individual programs, immense goodwill is sure to accrue to these companies as we make a reconnection between capital, people, and place. Cream of the crop training centers, CCTC, will be set up in low-income areas and inner cities where citizens who are serious about their future can make their dreams come true. These CCTCs are not unlike the Small Business Development Centers, SBDCs, in NYC, although we plan for them to be more effective through the participation of local leaders. We empower the local community to be directly involved from cradle to job, through the trials of each stage, with multiple layers of support and direct connections with companies and their needs for employment. The CCTC will unite community leaders, businesses, local agencies, and skilled professionals to process applicants and coordinate individual plans to meet their individual needs. Train and educate the most qualified to acquire the skills they need to join the workforce. Provide a 21st Century Life program that teaches the basics of how to pay taxes, balance a bank account or budget, invest, participate in government, or know how to deal with adversity of all types that we all face at one time or another while becoming better American citizens overall. Refer applicants to partner trade schools, certificates, or tracks within colleges of higher learning, or CCTC facilities in other regions with the specialty training needed for the individual. Provide training and education as long as entrants agree to abide by standards of performance that will include maintaining grades, as applicable, strict attendance levels, workplace level conduct, and volunteer service to the communities in which they reside. Build trust with local communities who in many places are intimidated or don't trust existing government programs. The building of a CCTC in their neighborhood provides an access point to getting help and learning about the AJP, as well as getting information on existing programs existing outside the AJP if they are better suited to help the individual. The AJP will work in coordination with local middle and high schools and community colleges to ensure the best students see a path to success. In addition, adults of all ages could qualify for an invitation by taking a test. We envision an opportunity for the formerly incarcerated who have exhibited the hallmarks of actual reform, such as by the completion of prison programs, to elect to become productive citizens and enter the AJP by applying to the local CCTC. Providing a path for former prisoners and juvenile offenders to exit the revolving system of imprisonment through hard work would also reduce prison populations and turn criminals destined for a lifetime of criminal activities into productive citizens instead of being a strain on our lagging economy. 4 critical components of the AJP CCTC program that bring this beyond a pure education play are mandatory community volunteering, workplace discipline training, 360-degree support, and a living stipend. Mandatory community volunteering. All enrollees must participate in approved community volunteering in their neighborhoods. It teaches the importance of giving back as well as providing a local face to the AJP. Volunteer efforts will primarily focus on activities with broad community impact, such as beautifying and improving the physical environment, supporting the expansion of local kids programs such as local sports leagues, and patrolling playgrounds to ensure safety. Just like when communities rally around an athlete because they know he or she has a chance to make it out, local citizens will encourage students to succeed, as there will be a direct connection between success of the AJP and improvement in their lives. Teaching workforce discipline. Strict standards of discipline must be maintained to attend the AJP and CCTC centers. This is no free ride, as participants must work hard and maintain strict attendance and performance levels, i.e., if it's not allowed in the workplace, it's not allowed at the AJP. 360-degree support. Many local examples throughout the country prove that a 360-degree view of each student is essential to success. The AJP will also provide counselors, social workers, urban mentors, and life coaches to help students deal with the varied social and mental issues that many struggle with in these at-risk communities. As an example, PTSD is an undiagnosed problem in many of these communities, and we need to invest in the well-being of these students so they can achieve at high levels and fulfill their potential. Living stipend. Lastly, beyond providing education and training, Students who fulfill all requirements will be entitled to a living stipend. For many young adults in the inner cities, providing education is not enough because many come from broken homes that rely on them to support the family. In the same manner that companies often send their employees to get additional degrees or skills while on the payroll that they then bring back to the benefit of the company. Our students who show need will be able to pay their bills and will not be precluded from taking advantage of the AJP. By doing this, we are addressing a cycle of intergenerational poverty, years of neglect caused by racism, classism, and socioeconomic disadvantages, and will break the cycles of poverty and lack of opportunity. We enable maximum participation and not only change the lives of the individual enrollees but change the destinies of whole families. The value systems of communities are altered, and we bring these people and their communities into the free market economy that rewards them for hard work and investing in themselves. Ultimately, they are taught the skills to participate on an equal playing field in the economy. The AJP. In conclusion, infrastructure includes our citizenry. The AJP will be a pillar of hope for otherwise hopeless communities. Citizens will have choices to do the hard work that will put them on a clear path to becoming working citizens, and local companies will have a homegrown, motivated, and qualified workforce to fill jobs that are needed for them to grow. Each community will benefit from the volunteer work being done by every CCTC student in and around the area. Decaying cities will begin to thrive, and people will be once again invested in and proud of their communities. Inner cities benefit enormously, and people feel better about themselves and about their government as their hard work is rewarded and they are prepared to meet the challenges of their world. We believe it is time to connect good students with good jobs. Without reference to racial and economic identity, instead of the continued frustration created by a systemic lack of opportunity afforded inner city residents. AJP will provide hope to current and future generations and provide tangible, foreseeable reasons to stay in school and perform at higher levels.